everyone, this is Jim Johnson, and I want to welcome you to this Appliance University training video, the focus of which this time around is going to be on central air conditioning systems. Want to point out that what we've done is we've brought a central air conditioning system into our studios to make it easy for you to understand how we're going to be explaining these concepts on central HVAC service. We also want to show you how we're going to go through this process. For example, packed with your video is a resource guide. Now, in this resource guide, the first thing you'll notice is an outline that shows you the sequence and the steps we're going to be using to go through this program to explain the material. Now, the second thing that you'll notice in your resource guide is that there is a series of graphics. These graphics explain in detail some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about, and you'll have an opportunity to add notes and draw along with us on highlighting circuits, for example. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is that in your resource guide is a series of quiz questions. Now, we want to point out that these quiz questions will be presented at the beginning of the program, and then they'll also be presented at the end of the program with the answers so that you'll have an opportunity to test yourself and find out what you've learned as you've gone through the program. Another thing that you'll notice in your resource guide is that there is a dual voltage schematic that we're going to be using as our example, and you're going to see this in there several times. Because for those of you who are not familiar with dual voltage schematics, we want to make sure you have a good understanding of that when we get done. Now, we also want to point out that in addition to some of the things that you may be familiar with as a major appliance technician, for example, like analog test meters, we're going to be using those as we go through this process to show you how to troubleshoot and solve a lot of the problems that you run into. But we also want to point out that there may be some things that you may not be familiar with. For example, a standard digital meter that when you're working with HVAC systems that you have to use in a method of testing temperature, for example, of tubing and getting a good temperature reading of the tubing. What you can see right here is that we want you to understand that in HVAC systems, unlike appliance systems, this is sometimes necessary for you to do that. We also want to point out that there are some very specific things that we want to talk about when it comes to HVAC systems. For example, all major appliance technicians are familiar with a capillary tube as a metering device. What we want you to understand is that this is a particular kind of metering device that's used in HVAC systems, quite different from what you may run into in a major appliance. Some other things that we want to talk about, for example, disconnect boxes on HVAC systems. We want to point out that for those of you who are not familiar with the fuses, for example, you may look at this right here and say, those fuses are okay. As a matter of fact, one of them is in fact the wrong fuse to be used in an HVAC system. We also want to point out this right here. If you take a close look right here, you'll notice that we have some discoloration on one of these blades here. One of those things we want you to be able to look for is that when you see this discoloration, you may have a problem with repeated fuse blowing, and it's not the fault of the equipment at all. So those are the kinds of things that we want to talk about and the issues that we want to discuss as we go through this program. Now, what we want to point out again is this. This program